This morning I took a few minutes to really breathe into my heart. And what I touched upon was the heart of an issue that I've been facing in different forms for the last 10 years. Um, yeah, 10 years ago I moved to California to follow a dream, and that was to open a violin school. And I was very inspired by my own childhood experience, and I was inspired by what I had seen in the business world in terms of how we evaluated CEOs as investors. So I worked for a private equity firm where we would be choosing how to deploy our investment capital into companies. And a huge piece of that, after we'd sort of identified industries that we wanted to be involved in and the size of the companies and the size of the opportunities, it really came down to evaluating people. And we were always investing in people, not ideas or technologies, but the people. And I watched that process and began to take note that the qualities of leadership that we would be assessing were often attributable to a sports background. There were references made to athletic backgrounds as being a one positive contributor to the overall picture. And I began to be really curious about that because my own experience was in school that there was the divide between the jocks and the nerds or the music types. So people in band and orchestra typically were not the same subgroup that were in football, basketball, and the other sports. And of course that whole theme was explored in Glee back when I used to watch television. But it's true. That divide is true, and I began to ask why that was, and I guess it awakened in me that sense of injustice about somehow athletics being cooler than music, and that the people that can get through and succeed in athletics are somehow higher on some kind of hierarchy in our social structure than the musicians. And so I looked at my own experience with music and I said, that was my main experience in my childhood, and I see myself as a leader, and here's the ingredients that I see as being cultivated in a certain kind of music experience. And then I saw the opportunity to turn that into an educational enrichment offering. So, and then it came down to living up to the standard that I had achieved in terms of my income by being in that industry. And I was definitely ground floor in that industry, so I had not realized the full potential of the financial rewards at all in the private equity industry. But it was still far above anything I'd really ever thought I would make at that point in my life, because I'd been conditioned to see my path as being this very flat income curve for a long period of time as I invested in my training, if I were to be a doctor, and then hopefully one day to slightly have an inflection point. But I never had exponential charts for my income. But this was sort of a quantum leap for me. And then I was exposed to this vision of people speaking in millions of dollars, not hundreds or thousands or hundreds of thousands, but millions. This was just sort of the unit of currency was millions. And so I brought some of that mindset back to this idea of creating a violin school, which I never thought of as a business until that point in my life, where I thought, oh, this could be a business opportunity in terms of a way to bring in money, not a growth investment that would blow up into some huge public company. That's not how I saw it, but I saw it as a way to exchange value. And then I brought in a lot of the business metrics and ways of thinking that I learned. But the whole tension that I felt as I started to do it, because I didn't stay outside of the business as a strategist and visionary who then hired people to carry out this vision. I was doing all of it. I was being the strategist, the visionary, and building the website and hauling the stuff in and out of my car every day, 4 times a day, and recruiting the students, collecting the money, teaching the students, teaching the parents, organizing performances, doing the publicity for that, and so everything. And as I got into doing all of that, I realized that the heart of what I was doing was this interaction with the children. That's what the value was, and that I had to sell that to parents, and I had to influence parents enough to participate and support what I was really teaching. I don't say providing, because it wasn't anything I sort of implanted in someone. It was this ongoing relationship. And the heart of the turmoil was I felt like I was practicing an art form, because it was very different with every single person. The process was unique to every individual. And yet, to sell a product, which is what any business transaction is, there's some idea that people have in their head of what that product is. There's an expectation going in of what they're going to receive. And so something has to be presented in advance that forms this image. And at the time, I wasn't aware of visualization techniques, but it would have been really interesting to ask up front what the vision for that process was for the parents. I didn't have that. I provided the vision. I painted this picture, and then I just allowed everyone's projections to go into that and flow into the school without my knowing. And to some extent, there was an illusion of standardization, that if you just bought into this, something would happen. And yes, I emphasize the participation, and I think people at some level said, okay, yeah, I can follow instructions and do that, and I'll get that result too. Whatever that was. And again, that wasn't explicit. It was never asked from their perspective what their vision was until the very end of the school. And so I was providing an art, and I was very actually open to whatever was going to happen with the child. I didn't have attachments to how long it was going to take or what constituted the right amount of time to learn something, and that was a strength, because I had just the persistence and the belief that if we stayed with it, just like learning to walk, that every child would learn to walk in their own way, in their own time. And it was that kind of a support, and I had that experience right up front with very different learning styles and paces and different parenting styles and paces. And yet, what I saw over time was that as the community grew and the number of parents' eyes in the audience grew, there was more and more comparison. And back and forth about, what can I do to get my child to be like this one? And I really discouraged that conversation with me, but that didn't mean that I could stop the thought process that which then, since I didn't allow that conversation to happen with me, it just happened with other parents. So there was just, that was their conversation, sharing practices amongst themselves, and who knows what else. So I created this culture of like very well behaved people in front of me, and who knows what else went on behind the scenes. And I wasn't prepared for transparency or dealing with difficulties and challenges um, in the moment. I sort of stored them all inside and came up with solutions and then decreed them at the time that I reached my breaking point. So these were all my learnings and development as a leader myself. And all the while I felt this pressure to build and scale. And I told the story in a previous video about scaling financially, and that was a good thing for my own life support on the financial level. But it never addressed the heart of the exploration, which was I really felt like I wanted a small boutique, like I was a jewelry maker that made very one-of-a-kind, unique pieces that would just sit until the right buyer came, and then they would go at the value that matched that. And so I didn't need to get large. I wanted to do very intricate work with a few people who valued me, which I never saw a business model for, except for kind of high-end fashion boutiques or something like that. But that just seemed too base for me. I wasn't familiar with art as commerce, and I don't know that that's the right model either. And so that was never resolved. I proved to myself that the money wasn't the reason I was doing it when, at the end of 2009, after Christmas, I'd come home and my to-do list for my business was send out the invoices for the next semester. And that's a very, mindful practice of one by one looking at the names and asking for that money and making a promise. It was, for me, I was making an internal promise to that family, that child, that I would put all of myself into them for that duration of time, and I would charge people, twice a year, so they'd pay for about 5 months at a time. And I couldn't do it. This was the end of 2009. I could no longer make that promise. So this says something about my relationship with asking for money, which is that I'm not just asking for money, like, this language of allowing abundance to flow. That's not what it is for me. The asking for the money is a step in me making a promise and a commitment to that person to deliver me in my fullness, in my full participation. And that's done with a lot of joy and with total freedom when I'm there on that same page. I totally 3,000% agree to that. And those are the terms under which I ask for and receive money. And I couldn't do that anymore in the same way at the end of 2009. And I found myself just physically not able to get myself to do that task of writing the invoices. And since I was in the coach training and beginning to be in tune with what was flowing, I got in touch with a place with, okay, if I'm not able to do the invoices, what am I able to do? And I found that what flowed with absolutely no effort, total ease and clarity, was a letter, a one-page letter to the parents in the school explaining that I would no longer be continuing, that I would do it for 2 weeks. We'd have our last class on this date, and thank you very much. And it may have sounded abrupt, but to me it was like the most clear expression of gratitude and release of myself into a new way that could have happened. And I didn't want, I kind of, for a moment after I wrote the letter, I realized what was happening and thought, should I call a meeting and have this talk? Should I call people individually? Should I have people show up to their lessons not having paid and just tell them all at their lessons? And just knowing the hive, I didn't want any of that. I didn't want to have to deal with that whole wave of questions and wondering if I'm okay and all that I knew would come out of that, because it was big. There was a lot at stake, and I wasn't prepared to face that community at that time in that way. But I was very prepared to take the stand for myself and to take the total risk of just cutting off my source of income and being there with a bunch of stuff to still deal with. The lease on the office space, my own personal living space, etc. And that's all chronicled in real time on videos elsewhere. So coming back to this morning, when I was really sitting with several of the things that are up for me today to kind of respond to and notice, it comes back to, with this last 5 years, how I've taken in the messages that have been put in front of me and that have arrived into my attention, which means they're still alive for me, which is the presentation of coaching as commerce and all of the solutions and methodologies and approaches out there that are being sold very actively, and somehow they're always arriving in my awareness. So I'm seeing them about how to make money from coaching, how to build a business from coaching, how to increase your income doing coaching. And, I've gone through waves with this, where in the beginning I invested in a big program about this, and then I sort of completely turned away from that and even went to work at REI for almost 2 years just to get my mind off marketing and off this whole mindset, and just to have a different source of income and not think about coaching all the time. And then it turned out to be just such a healing experience for me, and that's another subject of another story. But then I've come back and really said, this is how I want to create a life in which my work is of the nature of coaching, meaning I work in different environments. I work with people one-on-one. I experience myself offering that. And so it's been this process of playing with that and applying the different models that I've learned and adjusting them to what I'm feeling at the moment. And it's just been, so the way that I've had my business set up has been very much in flux over the last few years, trying different ways of bringing people in, different ways of charging for that. And then every client, so in the last 2 years, I've really just opened into my own art, which has awakened in me, again, the handmade, one-of-a-kind, unique aspect of what I like to do. I don't like to productize things, although I learned to do that from all the messaging out there that says you have to have a signature program, you have to have a product with a attractive name and by the URL, you have to have a logo, you have to have a photo of yourself with your hand in it to look relaxed. Don't I look so much more relaxed when I have my hand on my face? So there's these mechanical rules that, being a good student, and it's like, oh, I paid for these programs, I should probably follow them at least and see how they work. It's just been like this slow, insidious creep into my consciousness that I've been applying these rules and not really getting down underneath the heart to ask, for me, why is this a struggle? What is the struggle for me? And it's not that it's that I don't want to. I don't value being seen as the successful business person in the ways that these programs are selling to. So actually, the end point that they're going for doesn't match my own values. And that's the disconnect. And what I've finally touched upon in this new orientation of integration and having gone to Success 3.0 is that there's some intersection of finding the financial flow, being the artist, putting out things in the way that represents you, and not having to have it be within this rule system or formula. And I'm not going to say that I got it from any particular person at that conference, because that was not discussed at all. I mean, money was the one thing missing from the discussion there. But I guess I became much more free to be in this world exactly as I am. And that's really what's fueling a lot of these video talks, is that let me shed some layers that have been there at work in very subtle ways over the last few years as I've been in discovery. And one of the layers has been around what it should look like to be in business, and it comes down to the professionalization. So the packaging that looks a certain way, and even like the forced authenticity of things. Like there's almost a formula for appearing to be authentic. And this is the challenge of our media saturated existence, and it's something real, and it's fuel and food for very rich discovery about what's true, and very rich material about what's unique. And so today, even in this moment, I am dealing with the tension between coaching as art and art as healing. So I do coaching, but I see that as an art, not a business. I do art. I don't see that as a business, but I see it as a healing and transformation process. And so what occurred to me this morning is maybe all I've ever done and all I've ever wanted to do was teach. And teaching is so broad. There's so many ways to teach. I'm teaching right now. If you're watching this and taking it in, there's something going on for me in terms of conveying something. And maybe there's something happening for you in terms of learning and observing in a different way. I teach when I play music the way I play. I feel like I teach a way of showing up with my instrument, just like Bobby McFerrin teaches every time he steps on stage, a new way to be. It's like, wow, who just walks onto the stage at Davies Symphony Hall like they're walking into their kitchen? And he does. You could see it in his body. And that's his teaching. So the way that I show up in the world is the teaching. And to me, it's always a gift. And if you look at so many teachers over time, it's not been a business. It's like something they just have to do. It's almost like being a street performer. They have to do their teaching. And it's not about how much money they're going to get up front or how many students they're going to have, but it's the impulse to teach and share and convey. And so what I'm discovering by just putting these videos out is that this process for me is my food. It's my healing, it's discovery, it's creative process, and it does bring me joy to hear that people are listening and gaining something or experiencing something in the moment of seeing it. And it explains to me why being a pure entertainer or artist for commerce, selling, having paintings in galleries doesn't really mean anything to me. It's fine, but it doesn't have any charge. It doesn't have any juice. It doesn't really light me up. But teaching through various mediums, whether it's having books in the world, having retreats, lectures, workshops, being able to travel and interact with people just in this sharing way where there's an audience that wants to hear something and be in conversation about it, that really electrifies me and excites me. So the business stuff is like, okay, fine. Like, I can see how there's certain vehicles and platforms that would be really supportive to my teaching mission. But the pure idea of setting up a chain where I'm having these transactions of here's what I offer, here's what I charge, come on over and get it. Like even offering a treatment to someone where they're just receiving something and they feel good for the rest of that day or the few days after, doesn't have the same charge as the way a transmission of teaching changes everything at every level that begins with thought and mindset and consciousness and flows into all of the cells of the body that become action and the way that we operate in the world. That whole chain reaction, I feel, is an outcome of teaching and experiences of teaching. That's what lights me up and that's what electrifies me. And so I think that it's been a word that I've avoided for 5 years because I was a teacher. I was a violin teacher. And I didn't even want to own that at the time because it just seemed so basic and not really covering all of what I was trying to teach, which was consciousness and growth and learning and leadership. Leadership teacher. There's not even a word for that. And in our society, teacher is not a very respected term. I was told not to be a teacher when I was growing up. And I think my grandfather, who was a teacher, told his children not to be teachers for whatever reason, as many people do when they give advice to their children, not to be what I am or whatever. So I haven't owned the title of teacher. I haven't been willing to say that maybe what I really do is teach. And here's the ways I teach. I make art to teach about creative process and about me as a person coming out and to show that this is how I did it and to inspire people to take their own path and explore what they become. I perform music to teach. I give sound meditation experiences and journeys to teach a new experience in the body and the imagination. I teach vision board workshops to give people that space and time to connect with their own vision and create something that they take home and becomes a powerful vehicle for them for the rest of that year. I teach through writing. I teach through stories of my own realization to help people form bridges in their own experience to what they might realize in their own lives. And I don't know about the business part. It's not a formula that I've seen, and I feel that all of the little technologies that I'm learning, I've learned from those formulas, like how to interact with the web and have a presence there and to choose the social media outlets that I'm willing to participate in. Those are all supportive to the heart of anyone's work. But we can't forget the discovery of the heart of our work is the key. And to really dive deep into that and enjoy that before attaching to any given model for how to bring it into the world. So thanks for being with me on the journey into my heart and my work.